and join us, everyone. We're going to get started. So I want to welcome everyone, all of you that stayed. We started out with a very large group, but I'm sure it's a very busy weekend. So thanks for hanging out with us and remaining for this very special part. I want to thank Patty for all of her hard work that she's doing. And yes, hello. So we're going to get started. I'm just going to do like a little interview, and then Patty's going to do a reading. So anything else I should say, Patty? You didn't write a script for me.
No, I didn't. This is your thing.
Okay, so we're going to start. Everyone's got their books that... Perfect. All right, thank you. Everyone's got a drink? You need a water? Do you want to pass out waters? Okay, you can do that. That'd be good. Go get some water over there at the table. We have Council Member Rosanna Verder-Aliga with us here. Thank you for being here. All right. Okay, so Patty, there's a in the beginning of your book, I read her book. When I picked it up, I could not. Well, I actually didn't pick it up. I was reading it on my iPad, but I couldn't put it down. I was, waking up in the middle of the night and reading it, and I was texting her, asking her questions. And if you've read it, I'm sure you'll agree. It's like you're on this journey with her. It's you're walking with her, and she's so open with sharing, and it was very special to me. I think I could read it over and over again if I had the time. So if you haven't read it, I am so sure that you're going to enjoy it because everyone I've spoke to has, and I certainly did. But in the beginning of the book, there was this quote, and it was something that really stuck out to me, and it's, "There's no greater burden to carry than an untold story." And I'm wondering if you can elaborate with us a little bit more on what that means to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, first I want to thank Josette. I'll answer your question. But Josette, I remember she and I went to elementary, junior high, and high school together, and we lost touch. I don't think I spoke to you in like 25 plus years. And when I started the Robbie Poblete Foundation, I knew that she was working for County Supervisor Aaron Hannigan, and I reached out. And just from there, we've spoken every day, and her first thing was, "How can I help you?" And I had just gotten done writing this book, and it was going to be published, and right away she said, "I'm going to throw you your book launch." And that's why we're here today, because she did that. And so I want to also acknowledge Josette, and let's give her a round of applause. So that quote, "There's no greater burden than an untold story," is, I wish I could claim it. It's Maya Angelou. And
I tell everyone it was you.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me. A lot of us, you don't have to suffer the tragedy that I suffered, but everyone goes through life with challenges, no matter what it is. No one goes through this life unscathed. And I believe that it's in sharing those stories that we find power. And it's in sharing those stories that you allow others to know that they're not alone. And that's why that quote really gravitated toward me, because when you suffer a tragedy like the one that I suffered, you feel very much like you're alone. And you could be in a room full of people and still feel like nobody understands. No one knows what I'm going through. But I know that when you share your story, it allows others to come out of that feeling of isolation, and it gives them the power to share and to relate. And so that's why I put that quote in there, and that's why I decided to tell this story.
Thank you. Thank you. As I was reading Patty's book, there were things that I was going through. I did not lose a son or a child, but there were other things that were going on. And like Pat, that helped me. And I think that healing, that ability to find the strength to continue, and I think that that's important in all aspects of our lives. So I appreciate that. That was something that was helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to others that read it. Patty, the loss of a child is something that is unbearable, and you had mentioned that it's a club that nobody wants to belong to, and I think we all agree with that. But something happened that gave you this strength and this ability to share your story and to allow readers to accompany you on your journey. Can you share with us a little on what prompted you to begin writing A Better Place? Wait, I have to add, I wanted to send her the questions in advance. I said, I'll send you the questions so that you're ready. And she said, no, don't send me the questions.
I wish you did. After the tragedy happened, I think all of us, I don't just speak for myself, but I can only tell my own story. It was shock, and there was trauma, and there's PTSD, and there's depression. And I actually didn't return to this city for nearly 2 years, other than to visit the cemetery, which is on the outskirts of the city, so I didn't have to drive through it. And I tell this story all the time. My daughter Julie is here. She's not always here when I tell it, but I couldn't let myself continue falling into that depression because I still have my daughter. And I wanted her to see that through resilience, we could all make it through as a family. And I wanted to be that role model for her, and I wanted to be present still for her. And so I started writing the book without the intention of it being published. I didn't know if it would. You never know when you begin writing if anyone's going to pick it up. But it was a means of therapy for me. And it was because I started writing letters to Robbie. That was the first thing. Maybe a couple weeks after he was killed, until a year out, I wrote a letter to him every single day, and it became too difficult because I was asking him questions that I knew I was never going to get a response to. And so that just became too difficult, and I started writing this book, and that's what eventually pulled me out, and that's what eventually actually led to the foundation.
Thank you. Thank you. So my final thought that I want to share is that as I was reading Patty's book, and I had never met Robbie before, but reading Patty's story, hearing her cry, laugh, and sharing so much, I feel that Robbie's present. I feel that Robbie is present here right now, and I think that he's so proud of his mom and his sister and their family and all of their friends and stuff. So I thank you for sharing Robbie and for sharing your children and with me and with us. It's meant a lot to me. So if Robbie was here right now, what would you say to him?
Oh no! Stop. No.
That's okay. That's okay. I feel that he's here. I feel that he's so proud of his mom, and I'm sure that we all agree. So thank you so much. So now you're going to do a reading?
I am.
Okay. When I finished this book, I told myself I got it out of my system, and I never wanted to read it again. Because as you can imagine, it was a journey to go through. Every time I wrote about something, I had to relive it. And it was like picking your scabs. And when I'm writing that I'm having a panic attack, I was having a panic attack as I was writing it. It was that real, because to me, there was no merit in sugarcoating what happened or what I was feeling. For me to be able to say, and it was okay. I was sad and it was okay. It doesn't help anyone. So I had to be as raw and as real and as honest as I could, even when the topics were uncomfortable. And so I'm going to read you the hardest part of the story, just so that you could appreciate how far we've all come. Myself, my daughter, my husband, because you have to understand the trauma that someone goes through and the shock, and then so you can appreciate the journey later. So I'm going to cover 4 themes today: the shock, the grief, reflection, and hope. And grief is not linear. So when you read the book, you'll see that 1 minute I'm talking about being angry and sad, the next minute's a flashback of Robbie. Because that's how it is, that's how grief is. One day you can be okay, one day you're back 5 years ago, the other day you're laughing about something. So if it seems a little disjointed, I try to have it reflect my mentality at the time, going through the journey. So this is called, this first reading is from the first chapter, and it's called The Call. Bear with it, it gets easier. You can dance to it. Okay. The lawn at Cornerstone, Sonoma was bookended by a Pinot Noir vineyard on one end and a reflecting pond with clusters of pastel water lilies on the other. Rows of white chairs had already been set out in preparation for a sunset wedding, with a winding path leading to a simple, vine-covered arch, under which the couple would exchange their vows. Lining the lawn were tall olive trees, providing a natural light show as the sun filtered through their leaves, shimmying in the soft wind. After the ceremony, guests could follow a garden trail to a massive white tent where dinner would be served. A beautiful rustic barn stood nearby, surrounded by funky art installations and architectural gardens. This is where the dancing would be. I love it, I told Cicero. I had lost count of how many years we'd been engaged, or even together. We were friends and colleagues for years at the San Francisco Chronicle before our relationship evolved into something more. The transition happened so organically that we could never determine when it was that we officially became a couple. It didn't seem to matter to either of us, but people were starting to ask questions. When are you going to set a date? Where is it going to be? How many people are you inviting? Robbie and Julie had grown attached to him, having known him now for almost a decade. They called him Kia, a term of respect and endearment carried over from his own nieces and nephews. "Are you and Kia ever going to get married?" they'd ask. Robbie was now 23, Julie 21. Cicero and I purchased our first home together in the neighboring city of Fairfield in July 2013. September 21st, 2014 could not have been a more perfect day. That Sunday was the last official day of summer, and Mother Nature put on her finest for the finale. Julie had already left to spend the day with her friends, and I texted Robbie at 8:57 a.m. to join Cicero and me as we prepared to head out to the wine country. "Do you want to come with Kia and me to Sonoma?" I messaged. "We're going to see this place where we might have our wedding. We will provide food." "Thanks," he texted back at 11:12 a.m., "but I'm going early to work tonight, so I have to sleep. I hope you guys like it." Robbie was working with Ruben at Genentech, a biotech company where he was brought on as a temporary employee. He started learning out how to rebuild valves for manufacturing, but he worked at such a warp speed that he often found himself with hours of downtime. One day, he wandered into the facility's welding room and began learning how to weld. People were shocked to hear that he had no prior training. It didn't take long before he was working on custom projects. He would go in early for every shift, hoping to learn more so he could get hired as a permanent full-time employee alongside his dad. Before he knew it, he racked up so many hours that he had enough for a down payment for his own truck. He called me from the dealership asking if I could meet him. I walked over to look at his choice, an enormous Dodge Ram 1500, so massive it was called the Bighorn Edition. It matched Robbie's own stature. I took a picture of him standing by it after the purchase was over, still holding the freshly signed papers in his left hand, squinting his eyes in the sunlight and offering a shy smile. This was the turning point in his life, professionally and personally. This was his first major purchase as a working man, and I could see the immense look of pride on his face. Ruben is his father. Ruben and I remained good friends, and in fact lived within 10 minutes of each other. Robbie and Ruben were now commuting together every day, and Robbie was eager to show his dad what he could do. In turn, Ruben began seeing beyond his son's wake of dirty dishes and trail of laundry at home. And what emerged was a hard-working man who had a natural talent for welding, with an ease and confidence about him that he had never seen before. This meant a lot to Robbie, who had become far more outgoing in recent years and wanted to share his new interests with both of us. It was no surprise that he chose to skip our wedding planning day so he could go into work. He had been preparing for important interviews which would bring him closer to getting hired. So Cicero and I left the house that day, determined to come back with a location and date, which we did. After walking the grounds and agreeing this was where we wanted to get married, Cicero and I met with the event planner and secured April 18, 2015 for our wedding. Located on site was a cafe where we decided to have lunch before heading home. I was sitting at a shaded table while Cicero waited for our orders inside when my heart began beating harder and faster. I placed my right hand over my chest, wondering if I was just excited over finalizing our plans, but that wasn't it. Something felt wrong. The sun still shone high when we made it home around 4 p.m. I decided to make boeuf bourguignon to mark the special day. The dish required at least 3.5 hours, but securing a wedding site and date was something to celebrate, and Robbie and Julie always loved when I made the dish. Not just boeuf bourguignon, I'd tell them, Julia Child's boeuf bourguignon, mimicking Amy Adams in the movie Julie and Julia. I brought out the ingredients one by one: beef, pearl onions, carrots, flour, tomato paste, garlic, beef broth. I scanned the clutter counter as I tied an apron around my waist. Cicero came in with the mail, and I saw that the first bill for Robbie's truck had come. For me, this marked the official beginning of his adulthood, his very own bill. "Your first car payment bill has arrived," I texted him at 4:28 p.m. "Come here after work to get some boeuf bourguignon and you can get your bill." "Okay," he quickly responded. I brought out the heavy Dutch oven and began chopping the strips of bacon and prepping the rest of the ingredients before starting the lengthy cooking process. An hour had passed before I glanced at my cell phone again, checking to see if Julie had sent me any messages. I saw that I had a missed call from Reuben's mom. She left me a voicemail. Robbie was shot. Robbie was shot. I can only describe what happened next in bits and pieces, flashes and blackouts, life and death, and limbo. Imagine the earth beneath you opening up and swallowing you whole. Imagine everything good inside you: love, joy, kindness, trust, security, hope, burning and scorching to embers, giving way to fear, desperation, anguish, and helplessness. Imagine being trapped in your worst nightmare, knowing that you will never wake from it. Imagine feeling truly abandoned by God, by the universe, by humanity. Imagine all of that, and imagine it being far, far worse. I know I screamed. I know that Cicero came running out of Julie's bedroom where he had been painting her wall. I know I fumbled with my phone trying to call anyone and everyone, but nobody was answering. I must have reached someone, though I don't remember whom, because for some reason we were now in the car heading on the freeway. Fairfield and Vallejo were connected by a mere 20-minute stretch of highway on Interstate 80. But on this day, there was traffic. I cried frantically as Cicero tried desperately to weave in and out of congestion. I remember thinking that we would get a call at any moment, letting us know what hospital he had been transported to. "Why aren't they calling?" I screamed. "Where are they bringing him?" Instead, I got a call from Julie. "Mom," she wailed. "Mom." And I knew. When you go into shock, when your heart is shattered and pulverized, when a part of you is taken so suddenly and brutally, something takes over. I let out a primal moan unlike any sound I had ever heard coming from my body. In my mind, I was saying no, but it didn't sound like that. It was a guttural, wounded roar of a lioness losing her cub. For months, that sound haunted me. My body had crumpled over in the car. I pounded on the dashboard until my hands were red and raw. All my pain, anguish, confusion, and helplessness were trapped in the claustrophobic confines of our car for 30 minutes. When we finally pulled up to the location, I raced out, frantically looking for what I didn't know. All I could see were yellow police cars and flashing lights, officers, crowds gathering to see what was going on. I fell to my knees. For the next 6 hours we sat, Reuben, Julie, Cicero, my in-laws, as the police asked us questions. A chaplain with the Vallejo Police Department found his way to me, speaking tenderly and slowly. "Would you like me to offer a prayer for your son?" I nodded my head, not knowing, not understanding, not believing that any of this was real. We sat, until the sun faded away and darkness encircled us. So that was the call, and the story starts that way because, again, I wanted and needed everyone to understand the starting point. Because what we do is we read the headlines about a young man being murdered, or a daughter, a child, and we never think about what happens after that. What is the ripple effect after that headline runs? And so this is the day before the headline runs the next day, but what happens? What happens to the mother, the sister, the friends, the family? And so I really felt important about adding that part and starting from that point, so that everyone could appreciate everything, all the emotions that everyone goes to that doesn't get reported in the news. But it's not all traumatic. You know, I wanted to capture everything, and I wanted everyone to know who Robbie was. So there are flashbacks in this book. It goes back and forth. It weaves in and out. And one of the fondest memories I had with Robbie was the last Mother's Day I spent with him. And this is something that Josette wanted me to read. This is called Follow Me. And I want to read a little bit about that. The parking lot near the freeway off-ramp was mostly empty when I pulled in that Sunday morning. The sun was already out, but the air remained brisk. I scanned the parking lot as I pulled into an empty space, but I didn't see anyone around. Water bottle, check. Sunglasses and gym towel, check. I gathered the items and stuffed them into the small canvas bag that would sit underneath the seat of my bicycle. I reached behind my driver's seat for my bike helmet and began adjusting the straps under my chin. Hey, Mom. I turned around to see Robbie riding toward me in full cycling gear, black Lycra cycling bib, fitted cycling hat with its flipped-up bill. His outfit reminded me of the guy in the Taibo exercise videos. Oh, Robbie, I said, laughing. What? He said, riding circles around me. Where did you get that outfit? It's awesome, he answered, laughing along with me. It was Mother's Day 2013, and his gift to me was a long bike ride together. I met him here near Ruben's house and carved out the whole day for our ride. Where are we going? I asked. Just follow me, he said. I grabbed the rest of my gear, unlocked my bike from the rack, and set out to follow him, but he had already taken off. Over here, he yelled. He took the lead, heading into the bike lane on the street and looking back to check on me every 10 minutes or so. You okay? He'd ask. Yes, I'll ring my bell if I need anything, I responded. He came to a stop in front of a steep concrete on-ramp leading to a long pedestrian overpass that would take us into the neighboring city. Want me to bring my bike up and then come down and get yours, he asked. I can do it, I replied, self-convincingly. He then took both bicycles, one in each hand, hoisted them over his shoulders, and proceeded to climb up, as if he were holding 2 loaves of bread. His Herculean strength always amazed me. When we reached the other side, he warned me that we would have to ride alongside traffic. Just follow me, okay? I didn't know where he was taking me, but I said okay and proceeded to follow him. Cars whisked by us, but I kept my eyes focused on the back of Robbie's bike. He led me through downtown area of Fairfield, lined with old buildings housing new businesses. We passed City Hall, the courthouse, a patch of grass where the farmers market was held every Thursday. He pointed out the bike shop where he helped Cicero pick out the bike that I was now riding. The Mediterranean market where he bought spices. They have the best shawarmas, he yelled, pointing to the hole in the wall to his left. We rode along the main road until he motioned to cross the street after we went under an overpass. I had never been to this part of town, and I had no idea where we were going. I followed him as he crossed, riding onto the sidewalk and between 2 metal poles. Suddenly, we were on a seemingly hidden bike trail surrounded by trees and shrubs, riding adjacent to the freeway, though you would never know it because it was well enclosed. This is the trail I used to ride to work sometimes, he said. We followed along the trail, passing through open fields filled with nothing but grass and wildflowers. We rode through farms with stands selling stone fruits, melons, and corn. We had been riding for nearly 2 hours when we came across a structure that looked like a house in a fairy tale, white and pink exterior with flowers painted in its on its wooden shutters. A sign read, "Fresh pies and honey." I rang my bike bell, catching Robbie's attention. "Let's go in there," I yelled. He turned his bike around, heading toward the Hansel and Gretel-looking house. We went in, scanning the different pies, bought an assortment of old-fashioned candies. We each bought a slice, 1 apple, 1 strawberry, and sat on the wicker seats on the porch, keeping an eye on our unlocked bikes. "Where to next?" I asked. "I'm just biking," he said. "It's better that way." We hopped on our bikes afterward, heading back to the main country road. I tried adjusting my gears as we approached an incline. Without looking back, Robbie turned his bike around, came up behind me, and placed his hand on my back, pushing me forward for the length of the hill. "Come on, Mom," he said. "I got you." It was late afternoon when we reached an old wooden shed that had been converted into a deli and coffee house. Other than the slices of pie we hadn't eaten all day, we looked at each other and knew instinctively that we would be making the stop. The wooden stairs and porch creaked as we walked on. Old chairs lined the front of the wraparound porch. I pictured us whittling pieces of wood on those chairs, spitting tobacco from the sides of our mouths. That's how deep in the countryside we were. We pulled the swing door open, walking into the cozy space. The menu listed off smoothies, sandwiches, espresso, and lattes. At the far end was an assortment of cold drinks. Let's see. I want to travel one day, he said, as we sat down with our drinks. I want to see the places you've seen, and I want to live on a boat. How he would financially support all those plans was unknown, but he said he wanted it. He had been working at a county-run organization for more than a year now, serving as one of the instructors at the facility that serves 75 adults with developmental disabilities. His job included overseeing and assisting with a variety of community, job training, and classroom activities. He was learning a lot, but I knew this is not what he wanted for his career. Luckily, he said, he applied for a temporary job at his dad's work. If I get in, maybe they'll hire me full-time. When it was my turn to share, I told him that Sister and I wanted to get married sometime soon. And since my dad passed away in 2000, I wanted him to walk me down the aisle. He smiled. When is that going to be, he asked, clearly calculating how much time he had to reach his goal weight. I'm not sure yet, but hopefully this year or next. Well, let me know, he said. We got on our bikes, hoping to get back to the car before it went dark. I followed him along the same path, through the fields, through the covered bike path, back downtown, and over the pedestrian overpass. It was just dusk when our ride ended, the sky painted in hues of pink and orange. I hope you liked your day, he replied. I hope it was a good Mother's Day. He gave me a kiss on the cheek and hug before he headed back to Ruben's house. I watched him ride away in his comical outfit, knowing that I would always remember the Mother's Day that he shared his passion of cycling with me, a gift that required no money, no gift wrapping, and yet brought me so much pure joy. So it was a nice, Robbie had a lot of hobbies. Julie and I always make fun of that because it's so hard to capture who he was, because he was jumping from one hobby to the next, but cycling, long distance cycling was one of his passions, and I was just so grateful that he gave me that memory and that I have that to share with all of you. At the time that Robbie was killed, he had a lot of books on his headboard, and he wasn't religious in the dogmatic sense, but he was very spiritual. So he was practicing meditation, he was learning about Buddhism, he had not only the Bible, but he had the Quran, and so there were all these things that he left behind, and I kind of started reading those books and used that as kind of the breadcrumbs that he left me to follow his path and kind of continue where he left off. And one of the books was on meditation, and I started Googling, where can I learn about how to meditate, where can I learn these tenets of Buddhism, and I found this place called Mount Shasta. And I asked Cicero if we could go there. Because religion was just not working for me. Catholicism was not working for me. And a lot of the things that people were saying to me were upsetting to me. And I needed to find another way, because the thing about grief, especially tragic grief, is people want to fill the silence. They want to say anything they can with intention of comforting you, but it's not always comforting. So when I was hearing things like this is God's plan, and God just wanted him sooner, things like that, it was really upsetting to me. And so when I saw Robbie's books on Buddhism and meditation, I decided to try that out and see where it would take me. So Mount Shasta is a Buddhist retreat where Sister and I went and sat in silence for a few days. And this is a short passage about that experience. This chapter is called Baby Buddha. Reverend Master Kodo and I were engaged in a staring contest. It was nearing the end of day 2 of the retreat, and I was sitting in the common room of the guest area, drinking a cup of lemon tea in silence. You signed up for a private spiritual counseling, she whispered. I raised my eyes mid-sip. Oh, was all I could muster. Now that the moment had come, I really didn't know what to say. I was tempted to tell her that I'd changed my mind. Nothing to see here, keep walking. But she was already walking, across the room and out the door. I placed my cup of tea on the square table in front of me and hurried to catch up. I followed her along the path and into her office. It was a cozy space with soft yellow lighting and floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with rows of books that seemed to span generations of wisdom. I took a seat facing her. "What would you like to discuss?" she asked. This was when the staring contest began. I examined her face, sweet and gentle. She wore silver-rimmed glasses and had a slight gap between her two front teeth. I imagined her with a head full of hair, playing with her young grandchildren or lunching somewhere with her longtime girlfriends. But she was here, sans hair, by choice, and she sat patiently as I tried to find the words. I wasn't used to people being okay with long periods of silence. I expected her to prod me more. I wanted her to break this. We could have stayed for hours this way without a word spoken between us. "My son," I began. I could already feel my throat tightening. I waited a while before trying again, as her serene gaze remained unbroken. "My son was shot and killed just 2 months ago, and I just don't understand. I don't understand how something like this can happen to him, to our family." By now, I was sobbing uncontrollably. Master Kodo placed her palms together to her heart. She looked genuinely pained. "Oh, my dear," she said, now pressing her right palm flatly against her chest. She sat back and waited for me to continue. "I don't know why I'm here, but I think Robbie wants me to be here. I've been reading his books, and he was practicing Buddhism and meditation. I want to understand him. I want to feel like I'm continuing his journey, but I just don't know what the point is anymore." I waited for her to speak, but she only looked at me, making sure I had said everything I wanted to say. "I'm trying," I continued. "I'm trying to follow his footsteps, but sometimes it's too painful. I'm angry that this happened, and I'm afraid because I don't know who did this. I feel spiritually lost. I don't have faith anymore." My sobs were unrelenting, and I was convinced they reverberated throughout the abbey, pounding on doors and bursting into Buddha Hall, shattering the fragile bubble of serenity the monastery offered. "My dear," she started, placing her hand on mine, "there are no answers to why these things happen. You are here, and that shows you have a stronger faith than you are able to realize. By coming here, you are continuing his path and honoring him. Your son led you here. The path you are following is his last gift to you." She opened the top drawer of her desk and brought out a Buddhist prayer bracelet made of wood. It didn't matter, she said, if I was Catholic praying the rosary, or Buddhist, or Muslim. The prayer beads would help calm me, even if I just went through each bead and counted my breathing. It was a prayer bracelet similar to the one I had seen in Robbie's room alongside his rosary beads. She placed the bracelet in my palm, holding my hand between both her palms. "You cannot change what has happened. It is how you deal with the pain that will ultimately free you from suffering," she said. I left Master Kodo's office seeing sadness in her eyes, seeing a disappointment in humanity that perhaps led her to this monastic life. I veered off the trail toward the snow and kept walking until I found myself under a canopy of towering pine trees, providing a natural shield and sound barrier between me and the monastery. I sat in meditative pose, preparing to sit in silence, but instead yelled as loudly as I could until my voice went hoarse. And even then, I continued to yell. So I think that's an important passage to share because there is a tendency for society when they see people in trauma to get over it. You know, it's been a year, it's been 2 years, get over it. And that's not how it works. And we should never, when we are experiencing this kind of pain, feel pressured by anyone to get over it. And a lot of times when people say, don't cry, you know, I know the intention is good, but you have to allow that person to cry. You have to allow them to feel whatever they're feeling and not conform to what makes other people comfortable. It's just too much pressure. And so I would advise all of you, and I know a lot of my relationships changed with people because nobody knew what to say to me. And so a lot of friends, a lot of loved ones stayed away because they were either scared that they would say something that was offensive, or they just didn't want to deal with it either, and they were in their own pain. So I would advise you, if you have a friend in trauma like that, to just sit and just say, I'm here, and let them cry and let them be angry, and don't push them to feel anything other than they're feeling unless they're being self-destructive or they're hurting someone else. But I think that's a really important factor, because I had to learn the hard way. You have to tell people, let me feel what I'm feeling. So that's what that chapter, I hope that's the message that chapter conveys. Okay, I have one last passage, and this is when I start before this all happened, my job was I was working at an international organization, and I was traveling all the time internationally. Probably 35% of the year I was in another country. And I was working as a government consultant to national governments and the United Nations agencies. And this was one of the first trips I took after Robbie was killed, and I didn't know how I would take it. And so this is actually, I hope, is a message of hope. And this is called Always Forward. The lights had turned off in the cabin of United Airlines Flight 837 bound for Tokyo. I would have a 3-hour layover at Narita International Airport before catching a connecting flight to Manila. Luckily, I was in an aisle seat and I could use the time to prepare for my presentation. I turned on my reading light, unlatched my meal tray, and placed my laptop on top of it. For the past year, I had kept myself occupied, taking on a new full-time job, while also working as a consultant for 2 other companies focused on environmental sustainability. I was hired to work with national governments and the United Nations on their environmental policies. People worried that I was drowning myself in work, but ironically, it was work that kept me afloat. I had been focused on a project with the Philippine Climate Change Commission and the Office of the Presidential Advisor for Environmental Protection. Both were government agencies that reported directly to Philippine President Benigno Aquino III. He was the son of former Philippine President Corazon Aquino and Benigno Aquino Jr., a former senator who was assassinated at Manila International Airport, where I would be landing in approximately 13 hours. My colleague Phil would meet me in Manila, where we would then catch a flight to the country's southern islands of Mindanao. It was perhaps one of my most arduous journeys, requiring an additional 13-hour drive once we landed, where I would be taken directly to a meeting with leaders of 7 indigenous tribes in the region. No time to change or even wash my face. The big meeting would immediately follow, during which we would meet with various local government agencies and one of President Aquino's key advisors, Secretary Nereus Acosta, or as I had come to know him, Nerek. The meeting took place in Bukidnon, Nerek's hometown, where his family had established deep political and social roots. His mother had once served as mayor, and his father was Dr. Juan Acosta, a well-known and respected horticulture and plant breeding scientist in the country. The family owned large amounts of land in Bukidnon, which they used in a variety of ways, mostly for farming and housing. Among Nerek's latest ventures was an eco-adventure park called Campo Juan, where he and an engineering team had set up activities such as ziplining, rappelling, and a suspension bridge spanning 360 feet across a ravine and 200 feet above a winding river. But its main attraction was the first of its kind in the country, a suspended bike ride called the Annie Cycle that involved riding a bicycle on a cable that hung 100 feet over a ravine with an expanse the length of 600 feet. Mel, you would like that, I think. So daring were the activities that Campo Juan was chosen as the site for the Amazing Race Philippines. "Why don't you be my guest at Campo Juan while you're here?" said Nerek. As the president's key advisor on environmental issues, he was based in Manila, but he made a special trip for our meeting. I suspected it had to do with Robbie. I hadn't seen Nerek since Robbie died, and the only communication we'd had was a beautiful handwritten card he sent me expressing his condolences. It was more than I ever expected from a high-ranking official whom I had only come to know through work. But like my other colleague, Katsu, and like Phil, he had become a close friend. It didn't take much to convince us. I was exhausted, but I needed a break from presentations and meetings. Nerek arranged for us to stay at an exclusive lodge surrounded by sweeping pineapple fields. Bordering the plantation was the natural grandeur of the Kitanglad mountain ranges, which was classified as a protected area thanks to legislation authored by Nerek. "Welcome," he beckoned to Phil and me, arms wide open. It reminded me of Ricardo Montalban in Fantasy Island. He stopped in front of me, placed his hands on my shoulders, and looked directly at me. "How are you coping?" It was a question that made me want to cry. "How are you?" was the question I was frequently asked by the cashier at the grocery store, the bank teller, neighbors getting their mail. It was also asked by my close friends and relatives, and as always, I'd always answer, "Fine. And you?" Because no one really asks the question expecting to hear the harsh truth. It's a phrase that has become a mere greeting. How are you coping implied a deeper concern. It acknowledged a struggle, and it recognized a need to deal with that struggle. I'm stronger now, I replied for the first time, a response I never gave when I was asked how I was. Well, don't worry about anything while you're here. You are my guest. Just take everything in and enjoy yourself. We climbed into his large truck as he instructed his driver to take us to Campo Juan. Bukidnon was home of Del Monte's pineapple plantation and had been there since 1926. The region's rich, red soil, high elevation, and cooler climes made it ideal for the crop. We passed numerous farms, plantations, and buildings, each one soliciting a historical narrative from Narek, including the very spot where General Douglas MacArthur and his party had come to Del Monte Airfield before he famously declared, "I shall return." We bounced around in the truck as it cut through overgrown vegetation along a narrow dirt trail. Narek pointed out the different crops his father was growing before the truck came to a stop in front of a large wooden structure that resembled a huge treehouse. It was then that Narek transformed from a politician into a young child, excited to show us his new toys. "Come, follow me," he said. I watched him as he took us through the various guest rooms, pointing out the structure was built to fit in with nature. Tree trunks in the middle of the room, showers surrounded by treetops and shrubs, water filtering through bamboo. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. "Robbie would have loved this," I said. "He's here," said Narek. "He's everywhere you are." We then followed him to the adventure part of the eco-adventure park, though Phil made it clear he would not be participating due to an incident he suffered during the park's early experimental days. "No way, I'll just sit here," he said, taking pictures. First was the zip line, higher and longer than any zip line I had ever seen anywhere else. The only other time I had ziplined was when we went to Hawaii for Robbie's 1-year death anniversary. Julie wanted us all to go, and so we did, unclear of what it would entail. And though it was both frightening and exhilarating, it was a pony ride compared with this. I stood on top of the first platform looking down to nothing. All I could see below me were dots of treetops and what looked like a piece of string. "That's the river," said Narek. My palms began to sweat. "I'll go first," he said, barely containing his excitement. He lifted his legs and lunged himself forward, hanging upside down, then right side up with his arms in the air. It seemed like forever until he reached the other end. "Your turn, ma'am," said one of the park's employees, standing on the platform next to me. Holy shit, I thought, no freaking way. "Come on, Patty," yelled Narek from across the way, his voice echoing through the open space between us. "Don't be scared, ma'am, just relax," said the worker. I felt I was going to faint. My heart was racing and my palms were sweaty. "Don't be scared," he said again. I took a deep breath, lifted my legs, sat back, and flew forward along the cable and above the wooded area beneath me. I could hear Narek's voice beckoning, "You did it!" I kept my eyes focused on the platform ahead, where he stood to the side, cheering me on. The brakes would kick in, and I would have to plant my feet on the ground for a smooth landing. It was all I could focus on for now. "Amazing," Narek said when I made it over. "Now the bridge." We hiked to the suspension bridge, which looked like nothing more than a leap of faith held together by twine. Narek had a wicked look on his face, and I knew he was planning to jump and rattle the bridge as I walked across. "If you so much as sneeze," I said, "I'm going to turn around and leave." "That's no fun," he responded, walking along the bridge with ease as my hands trembled with each overly thought-out step. When I finally made it to the other side, Narek stood with 2 workers waiting to strap me into the last, most challenging activity, the anacycle. I stood on a wooden board staring at the 2 cables in front of me. On each cable was a bicycle, its rubber tires replaced with metal wheels grooved in the middle to allow the bike to sit flatly on the cable. 2 other cables attached the bike to a cable above, where the rider's harness would also be attached. "No matter what, don't pedal backwards," the worker warned me as he strapped me in with all the cables. "What happens when you pedal backward?" I said, my voice trembling. "Just don't," he said. "Always forward, always forward." Narek was already strapped into the bicycle on the cable next to me, pedaling before they even gave him the signal. "Let's go," he yelled, looking back at me. I was frozen. I didn't want to move. Now all I could think about was pedaling backward. I didn't know what would happen because he didn't tell me, but I knew it wasn't good. Narek kept looking back at me, waiting for me to catch up. "I don't want to," I snapped. "You can do it," he yelled. He stretched out his arm toward me. "Take my hand," he said with a look of comfort. "Just take my hand." I inhaled through my nose, exhaled through my mouth. I thought of Robbie and all of his interests and passions, his fearlessness and thirst for adventure, his willingness to try anything and everything and approach anyone as a means of expanding his view of life. I used this to fuel my courage as I began to pedal. "Remember, always forward," yelled the worker behind me. "It's okay," I told Narek when I reached him. "I don't need to take your hand. I can do it." I was pedaling in midair, the closest to biking with Robbie in the heavens as I could come. I felt alive. My fear, anxiety, and anger left on the platform behind me. My spirit untethered, embracing the blue sky and the green canvas below, moving forward, ever forward. So I wanted to end on that note because it is a heavy book. You know, it's very honest, but it's not what I hope the message is when someone reads this is that there's a way out if we're open to it, you know, once we're ready for it. And I don't think I'm stronger than anyone else. I think it takes tragedy, unfortunately, for us to realize what we're capable of as human beings. And I think we're all stronger than we know. And we all have the ability to take something so tragic and turn it into something meaningful. And that's the power that we possess as humans. And if we embrace it, you know, we can change the world. We can change ourselves and everyone around us. And that has a ripple effect. And I truly believe that. So thank you to all of you for coming out. I hope you enjoy the rest of the book, and I'm happy to answer any questions or do more signings. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. So we've had some new people come in and join us, and I welcome you at this point. So we're still, I think there might be a little bit of food left. We certainly have champagne and sparkling water. So I would like to ask everybody to get something to drink, and we'll do like a little toast. I wanted to do a boomerang thing on Facebook. So if everyone can get whatever you like to drink, and then we'll just kind of gather right here. Patty will be here to do more signing, and then we'll be here till 2 or till whenever. So I thank you so much for being here. I thank those that came earlier and that helped, and I had a great support group helping me today, so I really appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's continue to enjoy.
Yeah, it was great. I was going to mention the part about how are you? Beautiful, Patty. Beautiful.
Jen?
Oh, hello. I kept